Okay, so what in the bloody wanking hell did I just play? Bedlam is a 2015 FPS developed by Red Bedlam and published by some literary whos called Standfast Interactive and also a company named KISS if the Steam page is anything to go by. Don't think it's this one. Both studios haven't done anything before or after Bedlam, and after playing it I kind of see why. If you pay attention, you might notice that the title also says The Game by Christopher Brookmyre. Bedlam is based on a book of the same name, written by a very Scottish gentleman called Christopher Brookmyre. Both the game and the book take place during the same event, but while the book follows the perspective of a man named Ross Baker, the game follows Heather Quinn, otherwise known as Athena. The story begins with Heather waking up as the new super soldier of the Greylock, ready to spew some very Scottish one-liners and to kick some Gaian ass with an explosive repertoire of laser pistols, double-barreled shotguns, rocket launchers and...
Christ, so I'm a cyborg who needs a video card upgraded.
Okay, asshole, tell me where you got these hacks and maybe I won't report you. Oh my god, I am so bad at this shit.
We just got here from the Minecraft archipelago. It's almost completely under integrity control. Advise everyone to fall back to Bioshock if you don't mind the smell of fish.
Wait, what?
Fly-high walls, barricades, locked on Europe. This is a cover shooter. I think it's Death or Glory.
Our motivation is the same one that was hardwired into our DNA back in the Meatverse. Ongoing existence. Altruism would be an unlockable achievement.
This place is unreal, isn't it? Yeah, actually it's Death or Glory, but unreal is in here too.
Yeah, it's not quite that simple. Heather Quinn is an office worker at Neurosphere, a company that develops medical products and technology. Unhappy with her boring office work, she volunteers to try out their new brain scanning thingy. The result? She gets trapped inside Starfire, an old video game that she used to play when she was younger. Normally, players would be fighting for the Gaians, but instead Heather spawns as a Greylock soldier, some abomination that is half man and half machine. If this sounds familiar, don't worry, I'll get to that in just a few seconds. So off she goes, trying to find a way out of this video game full of chunky models and pixelated textures. Bedlam describes itself as a shooter for those who survived online gaming in the 80s and 90s, and that it serves up some authentic gaming nostalgia with up-to-date graphics and gaming features. Personally, I wouldn't describe Bedlam as any of that. Bedlam is more like a weird amalgamation of the general public's perception of certain eras or aspects of video games. The game starts off in Starfire, and the Greylock soldiers are quite reminiscent of the Strogg from Quake 2. In fact, the chunky models and pixelated textures imitate what Quake 2 looks in software rendering. None of that hardware accelerated texture filtering or super duper hyper realistic ray traced stuff. While there are a select few moments where the game imitates multiplayer action, complete with cringeworthy 12-year-olds, these are far and few in between, so I'm not sure why the developers were so keen on pointing that out. Oh, and it also has a bunch of stale memes if that makes you nostalgic. Regardless, the Starfire parts of Bedlam do play sort of like Quake 2, and other shooters with chunky models and pixelated textures from that time. But the fact that I specified the Starfire parts is a hint pointing to the other sections of the game. After a while, Heather finds herself in World War II, or at least a video game about World War II. A fictional cover shooter named Death or Glory, which will bring about memories of series like Medal of Honor and Call of Duty, the old ones at least. It's representative of the early 2000s, a time when World War II was still a fad. And Bedlam won some major points for me when I saw that the developers went the extra mile. You keep the Starfire weapons, but also gain access to a completely new set of era-appropriate weapons, with actual texture filtering and even usable iron sights. Enemies and environments are also more technically advanced than those seen in Starfire, noting the technological advancements in Heather's universe. The only thing missing is the cover system, but if I'm being honest, I'm glad they didn't go to that extra mile. And later you get more different weapons, enemies and environments with their own aesthetics, sound and feel. In fact, I'm rather conflicted about the fact that I'm showing you all of this stuff, because seeing what Bedlam throws at you next is one of the best parts about it. So in the interest of not spoiling anything more in case this video is getting you interested in Bedlam, well, there's your spoiler warning. Although not quite as expensive as what you get in Starfire and Death or Glory, the other worlds include a medieval RPG, various arcade knockoffs and bits of Halo, because as we all know, Halo was the first shooter to exist, and us 30-year-old boomers were all shooting each other with energy pistols over the internet back in the 80s and 90s. Doom and Quake? Get out with that millennial garbage. In retrospective, some of these do make for good foreshadowing. For example, during the Starfire sections, you can find a crossbow that looks suspiciously out of place in the middle of Not Quake 2. And really, by the end of the game, everything is going to look out of place. But it's okay, because that's the point. You're constantly jumping through a series of video game clichés and stereotypes, and even Heather constantly comments on all the bollocks that keeps happening, which is one of my favorite parts about the story. Heather almost never seems scared or anxious. She just gets mad at the whole thing and deals with it by throwing out very Scottish remarks about whatever is happening at the moment. The game takes itself seriously and not seriously in just the right quantities. And that's for the best, because the plot certainly is interesting in a multitude of ways. The whole thing turns out to involve some conflict between the people stuck in the video game world and a mysterious entity known as Integrity. The former wants to keep the host through space-time open so that they can one day find a way back to the real world, while the latter wants to close these anomalies and destroy these worlds so that the flow of space and time stops mucking up, I guess. I think the only problem is that the random references to other video games do feel a bit tacked on sometimes, I don't know. It's a bit like those games that use retro as a marketing point rather than as a description of how the game actually plays and feels. Or maybe I'm just a bit too cynical. I'm also disappointed in regards to one aspect of the story, and that is the fact that the book's description alludes to the conflict between whether being stuck in a video game is like being in heaven, or if it's more like being in hell. Maybe the book goes further into that, but in the game it's pretty much never touched upon aside from a 30-second dialogue between Heather and one of the people stuck in video games. Being someone whose life has revolved around computers in video games from an early age, I guess that I was hoping for some more thoughts about how cool it would be if we could live in our favorite video games. And I'm pretty sure I'm not alone, Mr. Viewer. Although my idea of a perfect world to live in would be something more along the lines of Pokemon rather than a violent first-person shooter with gratuitous dismemberment. Either way, the surprises that Bedlam throws at the player, both in terms of story and environment, is its greatest strength. Because in all honesty, the gameplay is a bit of a wank stain. The shooter part of this first-person shooter kind of ends up shooting itself on the foot for a variety of mechanical and design issues. You start with a pew-pew laser pistol that can somehow tear apart entire limbs, and soon after you get a double-barreled shotgun that seems to range from super deadly to super goddamn useless. The rest of the arsenal is a mixed bag. The minigun just randomly hit scans all over the screen, which makes it borderline useless for anything that isn't 5 inches ahead of you. The fire sword has a useful fire, but the actual melee attack is pretty much useless. The weapon balance itself is also questionable, with some weapons being so much better than the rest. The pew-pew laser pistol you start with is actually one of the strongest weapons in the game, killing off Integrity Shadow soldiers in 1 or 2 hits, while the World War II sniper rifle takes 3. Which, to be fair, does actually make quite a bit of sense from a story perspective. But if the crossbow can kill them in 1 hit, I don't know why a high-powered rifle shot doesn't at least hurt them significantly. Not that it matters, since the railgun is a hit-scan weapon that outright kills everything in 1 hit and rarely runs out of ammo. The World War II automatic weapons are okay during their sections, but you're not getting much ammo for them after that until the final part of the game. But even if you did, while these weapons are functional, their handling leaves a bit to be desired. The iron sights are placed at an awkward angle, so you just aim with the crosshair regardless. But what really screws the pooch in many of Bedlam's arenas is the level design, which is absolute dicks. You have a few levels where you are stuck in a large town filled with Nazi soldiers hit-scanning you all the way from another galaxy, and you will feel your grasp on reality slowly drift away with every copy-pasted building you visit. Later you have Integrity Arscons shooting you from several miles away with railguns. Some of them can even turn practically invisible for a few seconds. Then you have a climb through tons of copy-pasted sky towers with these same Integrity guys. It's also common to jump into an arena and then have enemies just suddenly spawn in, leaving you vulnerable to a lead injection, or an energy blast or rocket injection, whatever comes first. Regardless, it's stupid and it gets especially bad in the very last section of the game, and by that point Bedlam was overstaying its welcome. This last bit takes place entirely inside the weird cyberspace that exists between the portals leading to different games. Unfortunately, you already visited this cyberspace multiple times before, and now you get to fight hordes of the same enemies you fought through the entire game, which, okay, that's fine. It's a bit bland, but not necessarily terrible. What makes it terrible is that this section goes on for 30 to 40 minutes, despite getting repetitive by the first 5. It's a never-ending journey across wacky video game references land, where you constantly jump between platforms and shoot a few hundred copy-pasted chunky models. A few other sections also feel like they last too long, but this one really takes the cake. And to top it all off, the entire game only lasts between 3 to 4 hours. Maybe that's a good thing? And of course, it also ends on a cliffhanger. The game is also marred by some performance issues. Regardless of whether it's chunky Starfire or the more advanced environments, the game drops way more frames than it should given the graphical output on display, and it also has some nasty stuttering sometimes. It seems to happen during Starfire the most, which is ironic as low polygon balls, but the main problem seems to be with the Shadow Cascades setting. Turning it all the way down seems to have helped a bit, but the problems still remain. In case you're wondering, the game doesn't have any sort of multiplayer. I mean, actual multiplayer. After completing the game, you get the option to replay the campaign with all weapons and infinite ammo, which is a thing. More interestingly, you get to replay the entire thing, but with all voice actors replaced with Christopher Brookmeyer himself.
I'm guessing only someone with Grelak technology can stop this thing. It's all on you now. I'm stuck in a fucking FPS. Of course it's all on me. Who's out there? Can anybody hear me? Hello? Do you read me? Come in. I read you. Hello? Do you read? Calastria? That's from the Sacred Rain RPGs. And Minecraft? Black Mesa? What is this place?
That's different. And also kind of unsettling when everyone has the same deadpan, vaguely sarcastic Scottish voice. On the bright side, the game is fairly cheap at base price, and sometimes drops all the way down to $1 or $2. And with a price like that, I think we can easily overlook some of its bigger problems, many of which were likely due to the developers lacking experience or budget. It's been 4 years since Bedlam's release, but I hope that at some point there is a sequel that tells the tale of what happened after the credits, with more refined gameplay, more polished mechanics, and of course, more haha funny Scottish accent.